I'm Dan Krutka, and my background is that I'm a former high school teacher. So I was a social studies teacher, taught, like many social studies teachers, all the subjects, right? I taught um, U.S. history, government, psychology, sociology. So I taught it all in that time, but I've been in teacher ed at the university level for, a little over 10 years now. And so, I would get to work with, uh, you know, teacher candidates coming through their program, and then also graduate students who are coming back to education for different purposes. So that's kind of the on the surface biography.
Excellent. And I want to thank you for taking the time to join me. Originally, I had reached out to you because I've been fascinated by the debate over phones in schools.
Mm-hmm.
And I saw your commentary on it somewhere and reached out, but it became pretty clear as I kind of dug into your work, your extensive writing, and your projects and podcasting, that we have a lot of other things we can talk about. So I thought maybe we could start with phones in schools
Mm-hmm.
as a portal into what you call technoskepticism
Mm-hmm.
and the way technology is taught in schools today. How's that sound?
Yeah, that sounds great. In short, I think we're very reactive to technology in U.S. schools, right? We don't often have like a very proactive approach to teaching about technology. So each new thing that pops up, whenever a problem pops up, it's like we're always responding, right? And so one of our we have our Civics of Technology project is something. It's a grassroots organization. We don't have any funding or anything. It's just a bunch of education academics and educators who just feel like we're not doing enough to teach about technology issues in a highly technological society. It's just like this thing that's kind of like missing from our curriculum in a lot of ways. And of course, we see all the ramifications of this, right? We see, the news stories about Wall Street Journal's Facebook files come out, and we see that, for example, young adolescent girls in particular are suffering from depression and anxiety. But what are we doing about it in our curriculum? And so our approach in our Civics of Tech community among scholars is we've been advocating for this idea of technoskepticism, that students should have kind of a disposition and a knowledge base that helps them be skeptical of technological claims and intended purposes. Just the idea that technologies do incredible things for us, but they don't just do what the intended benefits are, right? They have other effects on our life that are actually a little harder to uncover. And so we think giving students reflective time in schools to investigate those issues and think about them can really be helpful in them making, decisions that help them live, both as individuals and as communities more wisely with technology. So, we have, futures and lives that are enriching and democratic and just. So I think phones fit into that.
Yeah, I'm curious. As a teacher, I've been into this for a while, thinking about it, and been at schools with different policies, and recently thinking more about it because of Jonathan Haidt's new book, The Anxious
Mm-hmm.
Generation. And, he's definitely staking out this position that phones just need to be completely removed from schools.
Mm-hmm.
And he talks about, schools kind of play around the edges with improving student mental health and academics, but actually one big thing they could do is eliminate phones, and they'll see improvement in all types of areas. And there's a lot of teachers I know that think this as well, that would agree with that, that basically it's not that he's anti-technology, but that phones are just, the power of distraction is too powerful. What do you make of his claim that this is actually one concrete thing schools could do that would improve student mental health and academics?
I don't think he's totally wrong on the evidence base that's there for thinking that removing phones could have positive effects. I don't think he has thought through the realities of what this would look like in schools, right? So there's several different things. The first is, for a lot of schools that have adopted all kinds of policies, and all of a sudden what you're doing is you're putting teachers in the position to police and enforce these policies that are devices that are very like integral parts of young people's lives, right? A lot of young people recognize the problems with phones; they feel it, but it's just at that age, right? When you're in middle school, when you're in high school, like if that's where your friends are, that's going to be of primary importance. And unless we get everybody off of phones, it's difficult. So I do understand, and he's certainly not the only one that's providing this evidence.
Right.
Jean Twang, who's written a lot on generations, her work has kind of been saying this for a little while, right? That we notice these kind of problems in society that came about right when smartphone adoption rose, and it's hard to find other explanations. So my perspective is that we need to be educational about how we do this. I'm not against his proposal. I think a school could do this, but if you're not accompanying that with thoughtful curriculum and discussions, then I think you're missing the opportunity, because if the students just feel like it's this punitive policy, my phones aren't allowed, then are they really developing the habits of mind to translate those benefits of taking breaks from your phone, from technology outside of school?
That's interesting, because I have been at and seen schools that have the old, when you show up, you turn the phone in and it lives in a little locker for the day. And, there's still students that will kind of try to get around that.
Bring a burner phone.
Yeah, exactly. Or just, hide it in their bag. Oh, it's at home. But I think you're right, though, that second piece is largely, if not completely absent, having thoughtful discussions. And I think what I was so struck by in looking at your work, I was reading a piece that you wrote called "What Relationships Do We Want with Technology Towards Skepticism in Schools?" And you make this case that schools largely talk about how technology works or how to use technology. And I think there's also maybe a component where we talk about general media literacy. How do you sort of evaluate sources that you see? But you're calling for something actually even deeper, and how technology changes the way we interact with the world. And I know you've kind of already touched on this, but just in sort of stark terms, what does technoskepticism mean to you?
Yeah, well, first I'll say we're all cyborgs, right? Like, I mean, look at us doing this call, right? We've got little amplifiers in our ears. You've got glasses that are amplifying your eyesight. Of course, we have technologies that change our cognition, right? Our ability to see microscopic things or to see, stars far away from us. So we have all these technologies that really change not just our ability to do things, but they often can change our thinking. If you want to get into this kind of line of scholarship, I think the most accessible book that I really always recommend is Nicholas Carr's The Shallows. And the subtitle of that book is what is the internet is doing to our brains. And he starts off the book talking about how he used to be a deep reader, and he noticed he couldn't concentrate anymore, right? And I think a lot of people have felt that. And so the point is it's not like the internet came around and just gave us more information. Well, first, the instrumental view is here's more information, that's good, right? What we've realized is, oh wait, there's also a lot of misinformation and a lot of junk, and actually getting to the stuff that's worthwhile and meaningful. The internet doesn't actually make that any easier. We have a lot to sort through. But the other thing is it actually can change our habits, can change the way we perceive things and the way we actually think about things. And so for him, he realized that he became a very shallow reader. He was worried he became a shallower thinker. And that makes sense when you think about the way that the internet is structured, with nodes and hyperlinks and all these things that just send you from one Wikipedia page to another one, to a YouTube video to another one. And so you're just always bouncing around instead of staying in this kind of deeper focus. But that can then be the way you think about things. It can change things more, but it's hard to realize that, right? Like, it's like a fish in water. You don't realize it's happening to you. And this is the same thing that happens with language. We don't even realize how much language shapes the way we think, right? The word options we have, for example, just make it so that we think about things in certain ways. And so technoskepticism really is about slowing down. I always want to say it's not just reducing it to a cost benefit analysis. That's a little bit of it, right? But there's also deeper stuff that, like, technology changes like really integral aspects of our lives, the flow of our lives, right? I'll give you an example. I'm very much, have taken a kind of a stand against cars. I haven't had a car since 2017. Which is not easy, whether you're in Los Angeles or whether you're in North Texas. And I've run across Los Angeles in many parts of it without sidewalks, the infrastructure for walking. But the car doesn't just help us go from point A to point B. We've many ways built our society around cars, right? It has sprawled out our society, so it's not walkable.
Yeah, this is perfect segue here because you're talking about technoskepticism, and the listener might be tempted to think that the techno in that word is internet, phones, computers, but you're talking about all technology.
Yeah.
And in your work, in your project, you have some great lesson plan examples. This is the Civics of Technology project that I want to get into, but one of them is about cars, deconstructing or unraveling, unspooling what a car means with how we interact with the world. And maybe you could talk more about that, how a car is a perfect example of technoskepticism about something that we've just kind of accepted. We don't really think about it in that way.
Yeah, and I point out here because a lot of people, they hear technoskepticism and they actually like hear what they hear is technopessimism, which we all live with technology. Like we are technological beings, right? That is like one of actually the things that makes us the most human in many ways. The point is like making sure that we're still running things, right? That actually the thing, we're not getting caught up in systems where we no longer are doing the things that make human lives better. And so I do a lot of lessons on older technologies. I have an elementary lesson I teach to our pre-service teachers that focuses on the electric light, right? It's, again, seemingly very mundane for most people. If you know about it, you may know that there's, arguments in cities about light pollution and other things. But I challenge them to kind of just think about, what is the possible downsides of electric lighting. Of course, the benefits are obvious, but they quickly realize, oh my gosh, without electric lighting and electricity, I maybe would get a full night's sleep more regularly because I would maybe live within the rhythm of, of the sunrise and the daylight and the nighttime. And so they realize electric lighting and electricity had a huge effect on human health and mental health because sleep is so integral to that. They also realize when you can light everywhere, it pushes humans away from each other, even in a household, right? If you have lights in every room, everyone can go to every room. The same thing with heating and cooling systems, right? If you have that around your house, you can go to every room. Back in the day, you used to have to sit by the light with your family. You used to have to sit by the fire or the stove, with your family. So it's not to say I want to go back to those things, but to recognize what's important to me. You know what I mean? And think about my relationship with those. So again, I use cars as a common example, and I've kind of touched on it, but it builds with other technologies. You think of web mapping technologies, cars and web mapping, and I mean by that Google Maps and Apple Maps and things like that. They're about getting you to the destination, and they really are good at bypassing everything in between. Now you don't even need to know the names of streets. You can drive past communities, right? It's a different way of thinking about travel. And I tell people when I got rid of my car and I started biking and walking everywhere, you see so much more. You experience it. I highly recommend, if you're a regular car driver, one route you do regularly, go walk it and notice all the little things you don't see, right? And it's a different experience. You feel a sense of connection to the place, feel a connection to people. And so that's one of the reasons I started doing that. And that's not to say you have to get rid of your car, but let's take some time to think about it and make sure we're consciously making decisions about how we want our transportation technologies to support our lives.
Yeah, you're right that technoskepticism is not anti-technology in the same way that an art critic is not anti-art. And more on that technology, even the technologies of the past that we just don't even think about in those ways. You write, at its core, technoskeptical thinking requires individuals to regard technologies as more than value neutral tools. What does that mean?
In short, it means, I think sometimes, again, we have a way of thinking about technology. We can just use it for good or bad. And if you want to go to the current technologies, right, you'll always hear this from the Silicon Valley bros who are pitching their products, right? When people bring up, hey, I'm concerned that your OpenAI is causing this problem in society, they'll be like, I trust humans to make good decisions. And the reality is we know technology nudges towards certain directions, right? If you give me a technology that does something, and it's very usable, it's likely it's gonna make me more likely to do it. So it's not saying people don't have agency. We do, but there can be profound changes. And so technologies, you have to think of them as having their own biases, right? I like to even like ask students to pretend like technologies do have agency. What are they trying to get you to do? What do they value, right? Cars value speed. They value space. They need a lot of space so they can always get a spot, to park or sleep, take a nap or sleep wherever they need to. They need little car hotels, also known as parking garages, right? To like store them. So they take up a lot of space that makes it harder to have like, human walkable communities, right? That are built on a human scale. So that's what we mean. And by the way, I also should give credit. All of these ideas have been developed in community, right? With the Civics of Tech project, Marie Heath is a core partner. And with the technoskeptical article that you mentioned, Jacob Pleasance at the University of Oklahoma and Phil Nichols at Baylor University, both were really integral in us helping work through these ideas together.
Sure. And one of the technologies, I was really tripping out on this. One of the technologies you break down on the Civics of Tech is the clock. Mm-hmm. And one of the best parts about having this podcast is just like getting to discover new things. Like, oh, I'm going to interview this person. Let me dig into their work, and then wow, okay. But I have to say though, like Civics of Technology, just for the listener right now, they need to go check this out. Like, this is definitely like on my informal pyramid of cool shit I've discovered doing this podcast. This website is really like up at the top. How did you and your team develop this? What's the goal, the purpose? The link will be in the show notes for the listener, because there is just so much great thinking and resources to unpack there. But if you could kind of give us the skinny on this project.
Yeah, and there's a lot on the website. It's also a community. We have monthly tech talks you can join on Zoom, where we no agenda. We just get on and talk about things we're thinking about technology. You can come in and just say, I'd love to hear what other people think. We have book clubs. Our next book club is the first time we've had a throwback. We're actually reading Frankenstein by Mary Shelley as our next one. We usually, our last book, for example. Yeah, our last book, for example, was we read, you could actually pick any book by Ruha Benjamin, who's a really great thinker out of Princeton. We read Joy Bolamwini's book, Unmasking AI, which is really cool. So we read a lot of books and stuff like that. So there's a lot of things to do. We do have a conference also in August. We're accepting proposals. It's all online, all free. But so this really, the whole organization came from Marie Heath and I. Marie's at Loyola University in Baltimore, Maryland. And we've been working together on stuff, and we were going to ed tech conferences. And honestly, we were just a little dissatisfied with the discussions around technology. I mean, we were just going to sessions where there's like, it's like gamify, education and do this about it and use Google in your classrooms. And no one was bringing up like critical perspectives about anything, right? Like Google invented this whole economic model called surveillance capitalism and has been sued by states for not respecting youth data, right? We at least have to talk about it. I'm not saying you shouldn't use Google. I do still use some of Google's tools, but like that has to be part of like our discussion. And it was just absent at these conferences. So we felt there was a kind of a void that was missing. And so we basically founded Civics of Tech to fill that.
Can I just pause you there for a second? Why do you think that is? I mean, I agree that is definitely the lane that ed tech drives in nearly all the time. Why do you think that is?
It's a good question. I don't know the answer. Neil Postman wrote a famous book in 1992. Neil Postman wrote a couple books that are well known. One was in 1985 about television called Amusing Ourselves to Death. And then he wrote a book in 92 called Technopoly. And he very much makes the case that Americans are like more technophilic than the rest of the world, right? Like that we see we're very technology solutionists. I don't know if this is kind of the kind of inventor capitalist drive. I even see this a lot again with discussions of innovation, which, by the way, was a term that's not always had a purely positive connotation. But now it's like we just want everyone to be innovators. But yeah. I worry a little bit about like the critical side of that. We want innovations that make the world better and better for people also who aren't like you, which is the problem with technology developed in Silicon Valley. It often reflects the people who made it too often and ignores other people.
Yeah. I just was actually reading this morning, the Rand Corporation put out a report about kind of how civics has been muscled out of curriculums around the country, largely because of our obsession with STEM,
Mm-hmm.
and the related, what you just talked about, the innovation, the design, create, and entrepreneurship related to technology. But I cut you off earlier. Sorry. So you had gone to conferences, you had this sort of disillusionment with ed tech, and then what happened?
Yeah, so Marie and I just got together and we thought about what would an organization that addressed this stuff look like, and so we said, well, I think we need a website. So we started with a website. If you go to our site again, civicsoftechnology.org, you'll find we kind of tried to create a motto that like really hit on what we were trying to do. So the motto we came up with was, technologies are not neutral, and neither are the societies into which they are introduced. As technology continues encroaching in our lives, how can we advance technology education for just futures? And so we use technology education there a little different. You'll sometimes see that term used in VOTech a little bit. They'll use it, but we're using it again about like making technology like part of our inquiry, right? We think about deeply about things like how the music algorithm is like comparable. I always say that one of the best ways to think about technology is to compare it to other technologies and just think about what they brought, right? Would you rather go to your CD store and look at their curation of CDs, right? So this is my youth, the way I listen to music.
Mine as well.
Yeah, and maybe go with your friends, talk about different things, look through it. There's a little serendipity in that. You come across artists you didn't know or that you'd heard someone else mention. Or would you rather have an algorithm recommend stuff to you, right? And I'm not saying there's not potential benefits and drawbacks, but usually there's always something lost in this. And the question we have to ask ourselves is, are we sure it's better than the older thing? You know, I like to also just rant about like just silly technologies that are not that important. One of the worst inventions to me is these motion sensor,
Like the hand wash.
the hand washers. Yeah, to get how many people are walking to 3 different sinks in like airports or whatever because the first 3 didn't work. And I do get like there's probably the idea behind that was it was going to reduce water, waste and things like that. And I'm sensitive to it, but man, they don't work a lot.
Yeah. I've been thinking in other contexts recently about just the economic concept of opportunity cost.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like it kind of fits in here because technology gives us so many opportunities, so many choices, but what trade-off as a result of the choices that we make, in the classroom, out in our daily lives, seems to be pretty relevant to what you're doing with your project.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and if you're, I'm not sure how it is for teachers, but at the academic level, like email is a good example, right? I had somebody recently, I have a very much think that we need a lot more restraint in email, right? When in my organization, I really advocated a lot for people like really being thoughtful about how and when to use email, when to use it, when not to just use it mindlessly so that we're all just sitting at computers, spending our lives replying to each other all day, trying to solve complex problems. But the reality is that, prior to email, there's an interesting tidbit. In Cal Newport wrote a book. He's really big on digital mindfulness, and he wrote a book called A World Without Email a few years ago. And he starts by talking about when I think it was IBM first introduced email into their office. They kind of like tried to see like how it affected messaging, and they realized it resulted in almost an immediate like 7 times increase in the number of messages that were sent. Right. So the point being that the technology didn't just allow for you to communicate, it greatly increased the amount of communication and how much of that is needed. Right.
Yeah.
Like, would we be better with a little bit less? And so, there's a lot of technology that I'm a cyborg that's very used to a lot of my technology. I don't want to go back to 7,000 years ago without some of the modern comforts. But a lot of the other things, does it really make us happier? Right. We have these, there's a famous quote. One of my favorite activities on our site is the quote activity site. You can find it on our curriculum page. We've been collecting all kinds of good quotes from different thinkers and people from over time. And it's a great way to get students. And I use it as a gallery walk. You put the quotes around the room, let students like write on them and think through them. And one of the quotes that is one of the most famous quotes about technology is from Thoreau. He said, Our inventions are want to be pretty toys, which distract our attention from serious things. They are but improved means to an unimproved end. Basically meaning that, yes, this is like a technological advancement, but it doesn't make our lives any better, right? Our lives aren't really improved by it. And we sometimes interlink like technological advancement with social advancement or social progress. And they're not, we need to take those two back apart and analyze it.
Yeah. You wrote somewhere, I read that an analysis of social studies curriculum, for example, that in an entire U.S. history curriculum, the only time technology is ever acknowledged as possibly having a downside was the atomic bomb used in Japan. And in every other instance, technology is just said, well, that it was better for society. It just was an improvement. And without sort of that critical lens. Do you think like the time in which we as humans come to accept a technology as inevitable is shrinking? I mean, I wonder if we were to go back and when new technologies were introduced hundreds, decades ago, if there was a longer adjustment period, whereas now there's such a torrent of new things coming at us. I wonder if we're just accepting them as just inevitable in reality more quickly.
Well, they're coming at us really fast, and we've never had it like this, right? I mean, you used to have like generations, and they still caused upheaval. I was at a conference. We did recently we did a presentation on our whole technoskeptical thing, and a guy came in and talked to us, and he said, they introduced books, and like that was caused little problems, but everyone was fine. And I was like, well, I mean, I don't think the people who died in the wars that resulted from books leading to this, the Protestant Reformation, like would agree with you, right? The thing is a lot of people also who are into tech don't know their history very well. There's this clip I use from there. The Social Dilemma is a documentary that came out. It's got a lot of good stuff in it. Tristan Harris did it, but Tristan Harris doesn't have like a humanities background. And there's this line where he's like, it's not like everyone got upset when the bicycle came out. And I'm like, that's exactly what happened. Actually, there was concerns about gender. There was concerns about mobility. There was concerns about race, right? There was all these things that did happen. And so the point is technologies do cause things and they end up with winners and losers. And sometimes you're just saying everyone ended up fine because you're only focusing on the winners of that technological change. And so, so we just need to recognize that, there's a variety. It's not just always reject or accept technology. There's a lot of things. And what tends to happen recently, I've noticed, is a technology comes out. We don't think about it very hard, right? So let's take Twitter. I don't know if you remember. I remember when Twitter came out, I was like, what is this? And like people mocked it. They're like, what am I going to do? Share my lunch with you, right? Okay, fast forward 5 years. Oh, Twitter actually is responsible for democracy coming to the Middle East, right? That was the narrative. 5 years later, Twitter is now responsible for fascism coming to the world, right? And so the point is like we need to recognize when Twitter comes out that it actually can be more than what is just intended and what you imagine. We have to think more deeply so that we don't get 5 or 10 years down and realize we've made all these mistakes. People have been harmed. You know what I mean? And because a lot of times we do start to pull back and start to try to figure out how to live with that. And that's what you're seeing with phones now is it took a while. There's a lot of kids that are not doing well because we just didn't think through having all information in your hand all the time and access to everyone might not be like good for humans, especially adolescents. Yeah. And so now we're wrestling with this and trying to figure out solutions. And I think that's what we need to do. We just need to start doing it earlier.
Yeah. It does feel like there was that brief, I don't know, golden age. It was like 2010-ish when it was the iPad came out and Khan Academy and, pretty soon you had things like Duolingo. And there just was this moment when it seemed like technology was truly going to transform education, right? Personalized learning. And I feel like looking back now, we can safely say that did not happen. We got some cool tools out of it, but that didn't happen. But in the education space, you mentioned in the project, Civics of Technology, there's curriculum and there's some really cool curriculum. How did you approach that in developing really thoughtful, practical lessons, more like units, really. They're deep for educators.
Yeah, it was just it was organic. Some of the stuff were lessons we'd already started to develop before the project started, and so we now had a place to put them. And so we have a couple frameworks on there. One is we have critical questions you can ask about technologies past and present, and those are derived from a Neil Postman 1998 talk that he gave to religious leaders, and you can find the talk on there, and it's great. So like with that, my suggestion is if you really want to think deeply about technology and say, and I was a social studies teacher, I think I mentioned earlier. So if you like have a social studies curriculum and you're like, okay, there's not much about technology, I want to go deeper. You can, the first kind of big technology that comes up in your curriculum, you could use those questions with it. Of course, there's going to be some learning, how to use them in scaffolding. They work really well with like small groups, give everyone one of the questions and then talk about it. Well, guess what? Once they learn those questions and understand them, then you can use them repeatedly throughout the course. So, when railroads pop up or when the telegraph pops up or whatever it is, you could like come back to those questions to have students think deeply. So we have that. We have what we call the technoskeptical iceberg, which is like looking at just different ways to think about technology, like political level, who makes decisions about technology, an individual and social level, and then also like a technical level, right? And so we have those kind of frameworks, and then the rest of the curriculum are just things we've come up with. Some of it has been developed by doc students, some of it just interested partners in our project. And so it's just happened. One new thing we just got up on the site that we haven't really advertised yet is there's a doctoral student, Ali Thrall at Baylor, who read this famous 1983 book, More Work for Mother. It was really kind of like this first feminist look at like the effects of technology. And the thesis of the book is that these labor-saving devices that were developed, they didn't actually reduce the labor that women had to do. Oftentimes what it did is a couple things. Historically, actually the family had children, and then, men and women had taken on all the responsibilities of the household. What it did is technology tended to take away the responsibilities of kids and men and left the responsibilities of women. And then later, what it did is technology started shifting expectations for life, right? So, for example, notions of cleanliness really shifted post World War II to where your house is supposed to be spotless. This is kind of a new way of thinking about cleanliness. And so Ali Thrall read that book and developed a unit that like helps to translate it to middle school students. And so we'll be having that in one of our blog posts, which I should mention, that's the best way to keep up with everything, is that we have a weekly, you can sign up for our newsletter. We do a weekly, every Sunday, we send out a new blog post on different things. And we always have our updates about things coming up.
Great. I love the approach to the curriculum you've developed. It enriches already existing curriculum. I think so often, I can speak for social studies, topics are presented very flatly, two-dimensionally in our curriculum. And this is a great way of enhancing and getting students to think critically about these technologies. Just to kind of segue here in our last few minutes here to classroom practices, you've written about slow responses. Mm-hmm. That can sort of help us combat the fast world that we all live in. What are some of those ways that teachers can approach teaching and learning in our insanely fast technological world? Yeah,
we all need to take a deep breath, right? I say this because, I was a kid who had ADHD in school. I think social media and phones were not made for someone like me, right? I want to just check things all the time. I want to do that. And I also want to be distracted. And so, the article you're referencing was called Anti-Social Media, Teaching Slow Responses to Fast Media. And this comes from some scholarship out of a field called media ecology, where they talk about anti-environments. And kind of the point is that we have things in our lives that are in the foreground and things that are in the background. And what they were really, especially regarding technology, and the point of this line of research and area was bringing a lot of things from the background to the front. And so when we get used to the way our lives are structured on social media, the way that, our lives are, sometimes our own validations of ourselves can be determined by the number of likes, the number of, reposts on something, is that thinking about those things that you do online, what does it look like to do the same things offline? Right. So what is it that you're actually doing online? Are you trying to keep up with friends? Are you, trying to learn more about your profession or something like that? And so the point is not to say that those necessarily are bad things, although you should stop and evaluate. Is this making me happier? I've been off, all the Facebook products. Mark Zuckerberg, I finally couldn't take it. His BS press conferences for every problem where he apologized. He has this whole thing. I don't know if most people have noticed it. He does this apology, and it sounds like he's got it down really good. But if you pay attention, he does the same one every time. We should have anticipated this. We're going to do better. But then it's the exact same thing. So I finally got off of it. And there are times when I miss things about it. I wish I did see updates from some people, but the trade-offs weren't worth it. You know what I mean? Being on that every day takes me out of the present, that the people I'm with. And I noticed myself that I would get distracted and not pay attention to people in my life that, if they were gone tomorrow, all I'd want is more time with them. And so what am I doing, like in their presence, like being distracted by my phone? For me, it wasn't the right fit. So I talk about in schools, what teachers can do is ask students to think about things they do on social media. Or if you're a social studies teacher and you're thinking about making change, students may think about starting a social media campaign as one of their first things. Well, let's look at how people did it in the past. Let's weigh those and let's kind of think about the quality of those experiences. So it's really getting to the core of the things you're trying to do. Marie Heath and I wrote a lesson that compared the 2017 Women's March to the 1950s and 60s civil rights movement. And we use primary documents to do that. And some of the big things you notice is that in the Women's March in 2017, the first thing that happened was the march. In the civil rights movement, one of the last things that happened, of course, the civil rights movement is ongoing, right, to the present. But that period, one of the last things that happens, it took years and years of building up. It took years of people going to meetings with their neighborhood, and being in person builds like strong ties to other human beings, and makes it more likely that you're going to, be able to make change and persist in the face of challenges. Whereas with the Women's March, people could show up for a march when they were angry. Are they going to keep doing the work? And I think there's good evidence that there wasn't the same kind of resolve when challenges came up. So I think we just need to show students what life can look like offline.
I like that. The Women's March seems to be an analogy in a lot of ways to just the technologies we have today, things that took time to build up to. There's an app now that can do that for you instantly.
Right.
And what's the trade-off, as you mentioned? Well, Dan, I want to thank you so much for taking the time. I'm going to link a bunch of your scholarly articles and, of course, your project in the show notes. Everyone can check it out, and love your thoughtful approach to all of this. And I know a lot of teachers will greatly appreciate digging into these materials. Thanks so much.
Yeah, and thanks to you, and thanks to all the teachers out there, right? Like you all are doing the work every day, and I'm so appreciative and in admiration of teachers. It's such a beautiful job. I always think being in a classroom, I've always said, what a gift to get a classroom and a group of students to walk in here and get to spend time with them. So I know it doesn't always feel like that every day. That it doesn't feel magical every day. But I hope you do still find that joy. And if you're getting a little burnout, I hope you have a great summer.
Awesome. Thank you so much.